Today's Religion Media Centre briefing is an exciting debate about Christianity and football, the beautiful game and religion, what's not to like about that? And if you think about it, Christianity is woven through the history of football at every single stage, and it still plays a big part today, often in a positive way, and we're going to hear about that. Although sometimes, for example, when I think of sectarianism, in a negative way too. So we'll explore some of those issues. But in reality, some of the biggest social issues being discussed in wider society, whether it's inclusion, racism, sexuality, but also community, togetherness, common purpose, and even joy, I would say, that's also the big part of the football story. So to debate the place and purpose of Christianity in football, we've got a very large an extremely well qualified panel for you today. I'm not going to introduce them all now because we've got at least 8 people and it's going to take a while to get through them. We've only got an hour, so I'll do my very best, but I'll introduce them one by one. We'll do the hellos. When we get to each person, we'll hear from them. But we're after a very lively and informed debate. So please ask your questions, put them in the chat, and we will relay them to the panel, or if we've got time, we'll also come to you live. So the onus is on you to ask lots of questions, and I will also do my best to ask questions as well on your behalf. So listen, to tell us all about the program from the Football Association's point of view, which is a program called Faith and Football, and that's the reason for today's session. We're actually part of that program. I'm going to introduce you to Arran, who is the Diversity and Inclusion Manager at the Football Association. So Arran, why do we need an inclusion or a diversity and inclusion manager?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Leo. That's wonderful for the introduction. So thank you for that. Very briefly, my role is to support football from a football association point of view and the county FA network in ensuring that people from historically underrepresented backgrounds and wider society are included in football and made to feel welcome within football. So the Faith in Football programme here supports that through working around the country, delivering events and sessions, as well as briefs, topics and guidance to grassroots football and the wider public to ensure that they can engage within football. Examples of that include our current faith work that we've been delivering. So we were delighted to join Watford FC for a Shanaka party late last year in support of the launch of their Jewish supporters group. We're here today with yourself in the Religion Media Centre to deliver this football and Christianity workshop. And on top of that, we've got an open iftar and call to prayer at Wembley later this month, followed up by a Visakhi event in Birmingham and an event around Vesak Day for Buddhism later on in May in Swindon. So for me, it's about making sure that people all around the country, people of all faiths and denominations, feel welcome and wanted by football. On top of that, we support with the guidance documents that I mentioned, such as the EDI guide and calendar. We've currently reviewed and are due to release our new document, Belief in the Game, which highlights some of the rules around football, which highlights some of the information pieces around religion to support not only those who are from a religion, but also those who are who want to know more about religion and make sure that they are aware of the things like articles of faith, as well as fact sheets to support their understanding. I just sort of want to close in saying that I hope for an honest and positive discussion today that really sort of allows for people to brief on Christianity, faith and football, but share their lived experience, provide listeners with valuable insight, and marks the beginning of the great work that we're going to undertake around faith and football.
Arran, you've explained that very well, and clearly it's multi-faith, but today we're talking about Christianity. But do you feel that there's a gap then in terms of how the FA relates to people of faith?
Not necessarily. I think it's just ensuring that it's as broad and as approachable as possible and making sure that people do see this and do feel welcomed when we deliver these kind of events. And these events are key to doing that.
I mean, you forgive me for bringing it up, but clearly we know of many examples where racism, for example, has been a feature of football, well, certainly on the terraces. Is that something that's in your mind at the back of this when you're trying to do this?
I think with all things, it's important to ensure that when we're delivering these faith-based events, there is a huge intersectionality part, not only across race, but across sex, across all the other protected characteristics. And it's just, as I say, making sure that people do feel welcome and wanted when they come to football. We can't control what society does, but what we can do is ensure that our actions are to the fullest extent.
And you've been a referee, haven't you? And you've been a coach. You've done lots of things within football. Do you think we've still got a hard time in encouraging people, particularly from diverse backgrounds, to be more involved with football?
I think it's just ensuring, as per these events, that people who want to be part of football feel welcomed and feel wanted. And that's exactly the reason why we're doing these kind of events. That's exactly the reason why we're supporting through things like our strategy, EDI strategy, the Game for All. That's why we're doing our Asian inclusion program, to make people feel welcome and wanted by football.
Okay, and you're running this in Holy Week or Easter week. What part do you think Christianity has to play in this program?
I think it's a huge part, just like all the other religions. So ensuring that we ensure that, across all faiths, all religions and denominations, that people feel welcome and wanted.
Okay, Arran, well, for the moment, thank you. I'm sure. Peter Lupson, can I come to you next? You're the author of Thank God for Football, which I'm sure a lot of fans would echo that sentiment, thank God for football. You've also made a series of documentaries which people can actually see on YouTube. And I think we could probably put that link into the chat as well. So, I mean, some brilliant stuff to see there as well as to read within your book. You chart how many clubs, and there are loads. I was really surprised how many clubs have actually started from a Christian point of view, or a Christian faith group, or a youth group, or something to do with the church, the likes of Aston Villa, and I think they started with the Bible class, didn't they? Do you want to tell us some of those stories about the big clubs that started with a Christian root?
First of all, I better explain why I wrote the book. I'd started a church football league for youngsters on Merseyside, where I live, and they were very quickly being ridiculed for just playing in a church league. They were told church leagues don't count, you're all wimps, bet you use Bibles for goalposts. And a lot of the boys left because they couldn't cope with this kind of comment. Anyway, because Everton, which is near where I live, is of church origin, and Liverpool is an offshoot, I told them, look, next time you get this verbal abuse in school, just tell the boys that Everton and Liverpool started off as a church club, just like you did. That got me thinking, were there more churches that started clubs? And I found that something like a quarter of all the clubs that have played in the football or Premier League in the last 5 years have a very close connection with churches. And I wrote Thank God for Football basically to tell the pupils, the boys in the club, look, you're not freaks, you're part of a rich tradition. So the book came out. It caused quite a stir because people could not connect the fact that football and faith had a connection. Significantly, it was launched at the FA headquarters in Soho Square in the presence of the chairman of the FA and also the Archbishop of Canterbury. There were people from football and church organisations present. The National Football Museum regarded it as the lost history of football. And I was invited to address the all-party parliamentary football group in the House of Lords at their AGM about it. Now, why is it that churches started football clubs, and particularly Christian churches? It goes back to a movement called Muscular Christianity in the late Victorian era, when it was considered that it wasn't just personal piety that should be developed, but also service to the community. And that meant such things as improving sanitation, housing, poverty, and so forth. But among this was the idea that in addition to a healthy body and a healthy environment, there should also be strong moral values instilled into a person so that they have a fully complete quality of life. Now, it was the public schools of England who instilled values of sportsmanship and fair play into the youngsters that attended their schools. And many of these became clergymen. And they took the values they'd learned in the public schools about fair play, sportsmanship, self-control, unselfishness. You don't play for yourself, you play for the team. They took them into their parishes and formed football clubs. And the significant thing about this was the clubs were formed in some respects to keep them off the street, to keep them away from alcohol, fighting, gang warfare, and so on. But very strongly, it was about making them into Christian gentlemen. And I'll just give you one example of a club, not in the Football League, but one of the most famous clubs of all time and their ethos. That's called the Corinthian FC. Now, the Corinthian FC was a club of amateurs, and here's something I'd like to read about them. They were totally amateur, that put fair play and moral values about such sordid things as winning. They never argued with the ref or entered any competition where there was a prize. If by chance the other team lost a man, either sent off or through injury, they immediately and voluntarily sent off one of their own men just to keep things even. And the league that I started, the Church League, was built on those values, so much so that people, spectators walking by, would say things like, people aren't swearing here, they're not arguing with the ref. Why is this? And it made the local newspapers. And the Corinthians refused to take penalties when they came out, because they believed that if you take a penalty, you're accepting that cheating is part of football. And so they wouldn't do it. Now, I'll just finish off by saying, what's the legacy of these clubs? Well, first of all, if you watch the DVD, you'll notice some of the CEOs of some of the clubs appear on them, talking about what they feel they owe to the founders. And I can just say briefly that several clubs have restored their founders' graves because of my research. Two of them have inducted their founders, their church founders, into their halls of fame. But one of the key things that they've said, and this was a comment made by the CEO of Swindon Town, was that football has lost its moral compass, and that we need to revisit the values of the likes of Reverend William Baker Pitt, who founded their club. That's one example of the legacy. Another example, the words of Robert Elstone, Chief Executive of Everton, who said that they acknowledged their debt to their founder, the Reverend Ben Swift Chambers, or he was at least highly instrumental in their foundation, and that the service he gave to the community, they are proud to be doing now, serving the local community, but also helping worldwide, particularly at a time when there were, in Asia, countries ravaged by tsunamis. There's so much more I could say, but I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, clearly very valuable work. And we're going to talk about the work of football chaplains in a few moments as well. And also, I guess, the rise of the visible side of Christianity in many of the players who have announced their faith and how important it is to them. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But it's interesting to hear you talk about the values in the very early days. I'm not so sure, as perhaps you're indicating anyway, that many of them have endured. But do you think, just finally before I move on, that there are still Christian values these days at the heart of football?
I do. And I certainly see this in the community outreach programs. The head of community outreach at Queen's Park Rangers said, for example, that the church is part of our DNA, and that what the church did in the early days, we are doing now by serving the community, trying to contest social problems and so on. I think this heart for the community is one of the key values, that you look after those who are disadvantaged, poor, struggling. And there is a very strong ethos in that among the clubs that I still have very close links with.
Okay, well, for the moment, thank you. I'm sure there'll be more questions on this. James Kendall, can I turn to you now? You're the FA's Director of Football Development, and I think you also studied theology yourself as well in Durham, and maybe you want to talk about that in a second. But your job very much involves developing grassroots football, and grassroots is a phrase that we always bandy around. What do you mean by that? What is grassroots football, and why does it need developing?
Thank you for the question, and it's a good one. I mean, when we talk about grassroots football at the FA, we talk about everyone playing the game in a non-professional way. So we're talking about those 3 or 4 year olds all the way through to those who are playing walking football and providing the infrastructure that sits around it. And why does it need developing? Well, it has developed significantly. Sort of picking up on what Peter was saying. If that was the start of football and clubs, where we are now, we've got 18,500 clubs up and down the country playing grassroots football on top of the 92 within the fully sort of professional and elite side of the game. Some of those clubs are one-team clubs. Some of them have over 100 teams, which is extraordinary. Really, we've got 1.5 to 2 million people playing the game every week within that sort of club setting. So the game is kind of has thrived and grown in an extraordinary way since those sort of early days. And I think, to sort of pick up on the point that was made, football clubs are very often the heartbeat of communities, and that's how they started, and that's very much how they've continued. And we've got some amazing examples, particularly during these sort of the COVID years that we've gone through, of clubs really reaching out to the marginalized and those who are sort of vulnerable, working with refugees, and many such examples of really providing that community environment beyond the actual sort of pitch itself. So why does it need harnessing and growing? Well, but because it's so important. It's such a kind of a rich tapestry and so important to our communities, to our society, frankly. And as a governing body for the sports, yes, we have obligations around regulation, we have obligations to develop England teams, but actually the grassroots game is really the game that we are here to serve as well. And so a huge amount of our time is spent doing that. We invest millions of pounds every year doing that. We've got substantial teams at the FA and at the county FAs who are helping us to do that. And we know from work that we've done recently, the social impact football can have on society is extraordinary. Some of the numbers that we've had, and there is in itself a key reason for harnessing and developing the game as best we can.
You've mentioned community, but to take it back to faith, and in particular Christianity, Peter, who you referred to, talked about regaining those Christian values. Do you see that very much as part of your role as well?
I do, and I think, to bring it sort of very sort of personally, it's one of the great privileges having the role that I have, frankly, in that my faith, my Christian faith, is based on making a difference, of serving. That's the model we have of Jesus during his 33 years on this earth. And indeed, this Easter was the ultimate expression of that service and that love for us. So for me, to have and to work in this environment and to work with a sport that can have such impact on society really plays to the heart of what my faith is, what my faith says, but also I think the impact that football can continue to have on society as we go forward.
And clearly, as I said at the beginning, you are somebody who studied theology. You've just said that you're a man of faith, and clearly you see Christianity and football aligning perfectly.
I do, and actually, I mean, and faith, are the two things. It's a thing that sort of influenced and inspired me to read theology in the first place. Albeit, I read theology with a number who had no faith. In fact, many were atheistic. So it certainly sharpened my faith. But actually, the career that I've chosen in sport and particularly this opportunity in football, I think both marry that service that I've mentioned to you, and Peter mentioned it too, that is what we're here to do, I believe, as Christians, but it also marries a passion I have and indeed what I believe the kind of skills and abilities God has given me. So actually, this role in many ways sort of brings that together in a wonderful way. So I feel sort of very fortunate, privileged, an onus of responsibility too in having this role, but very much, that my faith, my beliefs, my values underpin what I do, and is why I feel it's a great place to be at the moment.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll return to personal values and faith in a few moments, but let's turn to Matt Baker. We talked about chaplains earlier, and you're from, Matt, Sports Chaplaincy UK, and I think you're also the National Director for England and Pastoral Support Director in English Football. Have I got the title right there?
You've done very well there, remembering all of that. Yes, you got it right.
Thank you. I know it's in there somewhere. And I think also we should say you're the chaplain to Charlton Athletic as well.
That's correct. Yep, been chaplain at Charlton for 22 years.
So, it's a very simple question, but what do chaplains do? What is the point of a chaplain in football?
Yeah, we use the phrase pastorally proactive and spiritually reactive in terms of what the chaplain's role is about. So to unpack that a little bit, the pastorally proactive sense of it is being in a club regularly, week in, week out, partially caring for everybody, whether they've got a faith or not, or whatever that faith may be. So that may be over at the training ground, seeing players, that may be at the stadium on a match day, or on a non-match day, behind the scenes, talking to members of staff, just generally caring for everybody as much as you can. And I was
going to say, actually, if you briefly could talk us through a typical day of a chaplain in a football club.
I use myself as an example then. So, I'll go to the training ground once a week. I'll get there, let's say 11 o'clock. I'll watch the players train side of the pitch. I might have a conversation with the manager if he's just standing around. I'll go into the building. I'll talk to the person on reception. I'll talk to the club secretary. I'll wander into the physio room and see how the injured players are doing, those short-term and long-term injuries. And then when the players come off the field, then I will sit and have lunch with them and have general conversations with them, just about general matters of life. A player who's just become a dad for the first time, for example, or a player who's told me that a member of the family has got an illness. And so it's just general care like that. And when you're in relationship with people, then when something serious comes up, they'll come to you because they trust you and talk to you about it. So that's the pastoral side of it.
I was going to say, Matt, that, there's a lot of pressure on footballers, isn't there? Money plays a big part in football these days, a really big part. Do you find that players, when they're thrust into that world, they've got real talent, but they're unprepared for it, do they seek you out? Yeah,
they do sometimes. There's a support network, of course, within football clubs, and it's not just about the chaplain, but yes, a player who might be struggling. And it's often with things, you'll get a player who's transferred from one part of the country to the other, and you've got a player care department and player care support there. But you move away from your family, perhaps, sometimes with your family, but often away from your family because you don't want to uproot them from one part of the country to another. You're in a hotel for a few months. You're trying to find somewhere to live. So often you've got all that going on around you. Now, yes, when you go out on the field, I know these are professionals and they concentrate on the game, but there's so much more, of course, going on in people's lives. And so to have someone to talk to who's out of that, who's part of the club, but on the edge of it in one sense, that can be trusted is absolutely vital to help deal with some of those issues.
Well, people might be surprised to know there's at least 130 of you up and down the country, isn't there, who are working as chaplains?
Yes, there is. I mean, in the 92, so in the Premier League and the EFL, 70 of those clubs have got chaplains. And then if you get down into the National League and below that, yes, then you've got another 60 plus. And in fact, I was doing a training session only last night, and there's a chaplain at Stourbridge, for example, and he was on the call. So it goes right down towards and into grassroots as well. And some clubs have more than one chaplain. So at my own club, we've got myself, a chaplain to the academy, and then a chaplain to the women's team as well. So there's a real mix.
Okay, Matt, thank you. Let's turn to some players now. And I know that we've got the Reverend Puya Hidari, formerly an Iranian professional footballer, now a priest, and also, wait for this, I think I'm right in saying you're the captain of the Archbishop of Canterbury's football team. Did we even know there was one? Well, I was surprised to find out there was one. But amongst other things, Puya, you played football at under 23 level in your home city of Shiraz in southern Iran. You've also played, I think, for Muscular Shiraz FC, and you've trained with a lot of other clubs as well. You've had an eventful life, haven't you, in football, particularly in terms of your conversion to Christianity. Do you want to tell us something of your life up to now?
Yeah, thank you, Leo. Yeah, obviously, when I was just living back home, because of quite a lot of pressure when there is a place that the religion being enforced and there are a lot of societal impact and pressure from different dimensions in life, and you grow as a boy becoming a teenager, a young man, and becoming an adult. For quite a lot of people, sports is escape. And certainly that was the case for me, that I really found the love of football from the early age, and that was the focus of my life. And again, from the age of 10, 11, from 12 onwards, I just basically stepped into that a bit of more semi-professional attitude to football, which was quite formational for me back then. And it is not just about football. I mean, we all agree it's about what happens after that, all the social life that happens with your teammates, all the bonding that happens. And when I look back, it was one of the best time of my life in terms of having those friends, that the vast majority of them, I don't know where they are. Even Facebook can't help sometimes to just find those people. But when you look back, you just see, in terms of friendship, I mean, both James and Peter mentioned the community. I mean, the word community is quite a gift, I'm sure, to many of us. And it was a gift to me back then, because I knew people that they had the same passion. They were in the same team, and we were working for the same goal, but in different ways and terms, really.
Because I mean, your Christianity was a big problem, wasn't it, when you were still in Iran? It didn't endear you to the authorities, and I think you fled from that country to come here. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, I came here to this country about 14 years ago, and unfortunately, I can't go back, and I haven't been back home for the last 14 years, and possibly for the foreseeable future. And that was a change. That it was, again, for me, when we talk about faith and football, it goes hand to hand, not just based on the theory, but also in practice, something that I myself really experienced in my life, that I do believe that actually they are complementing each other really well.
And now you're a priest in leafy Surrey. I mean, that must be a huge kind of contrast to the life you knew before.
Yeah, I think, I've had the nomadic life really, even since I came to this country. I used to live in this part of the country, went to the northeast for about 8-9 years, and then came back here about a year ago. But again, it is very interesting because we are not too far from Chelsea training grounds, really, and you just see the vast majority of people, they are supporting all kinds of Premier Leagues, especially Chelsea around here. And when you go visit children's school, you just have a chat with young adults. As soon as you just tell them that you are not a Chelsea fan, they boo you as hard and as loud as they can. But it is great to see, that being a fan of all these teams, again, it's a great thing that I've really seen with people of different all age. I mean, often I have a conversation with 70 plus, even a couple of members of my congregations that are in their 90s, still just they talk about the football highlights that they watch every weekend. And that's just phenomenal. It's just amazing to just be able to have those conversations with people that they are at different stage of life or even background.
And just tell me quickly, what's it like being the captain of the Archbishop's 11? What's it like playing? Are they kind of rough and tumble players?
It sounds harsh, but if I'm honest, it has a lot of troubles because we had to just, lift it up from nowhere really to bring it, because the message that we wanted to just say, it is, Gareth Southgate just said it last year, that it is not just about football, it's what happens after that. And I think we wanted to offer this hand of friendship to people of all faith and no faith, and sending this message, because there are a lot of perceptions about vicars. And both, I think Peter and James, they talk about the local communities, the way that we are functioning as a Church of England. It is in the end about the parish system. It is about the local areas, but we also have formed something which is about the diocesan really approaches to sports, especially football. We have 9 pilot dioceses that they are working together to just see how they can engage with the local areas. But this initiative of Archbishop of Canterbury football team is a national level. All these guys, they are ordained in the Church of England. And also, sadly, we wanted to have a training camp for the women's football team, which is ABC women's football team. But because of COVID, that has been cancelled, and we try to just, again, go back to it. But it is wonderful. We have loads of plans on now trying to remember, 6th and 7th of, I think it's 27th and 28th of May. We are having a game and a training camp. Our game is actually against the Times, the newspaper staff.
Oh, yeah.
In Dorking Wanderers Stadium that we are playing, and also we are planning to either receiving the Vatican City and Swiss Guards or go to Rome and play against Vatican City as well.
These sound like great games. I wonder what the Swiss Guard will wear. Maybe those costumes, I'm not sure.
I think the more interesting question, Leo, is going to be what the results is going to be. We're going to be smashed badly by them.
All right. Listen, we'll put the details in the chat. I wonder how you'll fare with the Times newspaper as well. This is really interesting. Let me turn to Linvoy Primus. Is it Primus or Primus? I should know that.
Primus.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay, Leo. No worries.
I'm really sorry because you're an amazing and famous footballer as well. So I'm really sorry. And you've played in all sorts of places, including Portsmouth, Reading, Charlton, and you've worked under legendary managers like Harry Redknapp, haven't you, as well? You retired because of injury, since then you've been known for the immense amount of Christian charity work that you do, and you speak at lots of public events about your faith. Was it, when you were still a footballer, was it hard, do you think, and even now, being a vocal and evangelical Christian as well as a professional footballer?
I probably just took it naturally in terms of I wasn't, playing football was my dream, and realizing, at 27, 28 that football wasn't giving me everything I hoped it would give me. When I made a decision, over the next year or so to become a Christian, it was like football became the gift that I was given rather than the job that I do. So because of that transformation, it was easy to have conversations about why I chose to become a Christian, and also how I coped through difficult situations. And and what was mentioned already about the community, the Christian community. I had my church that I used to go to, but more importantly, I had a chaplain. Obviously, we've heard Matt Baker talking about chaplaincy, but I had a chaplain at the club who understood the culture, but also understood, about living your life out as a Christian within that. So it just became a natural part of me just to be able to help local charities, support them in any which way, but also for my teammates, being able to be real with them and, talk about being a footballer is great, but the reality is you're not going to do this for the rest of your life. And what does the rest of your life look like? So, yeah, a little bit vocal, but like I say, it just felt natural.
Because you formed a prayer group at Portsmouth, didn't you?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Again,
how did that go down?
Well, always going to be skeptical. You've got your teammates who just, if you bring anything different into the dressing room, you're going to get a bit of stick. So to bring prayer in and, say to the lads, come on, boys, we're going to go and pray before games, got a little bit of stick. But after maybe 4 or 5 weeks, some of the players who were giving a bit of stick and saying, you shouldn't be doing that, they saw players coming in and getting into the team. So they thought, oh, if he's got into the team after being in that prayer room last week, I might have a go. So we had a good mix of players in there. But that moment before games was just like a moment of peace, for everybody that would come in. And it turned out to be something that when it was missed, if someone missed it or it wasn't taking place at a certain week, it was missed by everybody. So it was pretty good, and the manager was happy with us doing it. So with that in mind, you've got his backing, and you just hope that the players accept it for what it was.
We've talked about, and you've echoed it yourself, the values, the Christian values, and how they affect teamwork and football. But do you think that Christianity also has a part to play, like we said with Arran at the very beginning, about stamping out some of the negative aspects of football, like racism on the terraces, those kind of big social issues that still dog football?
Yeah, that's it. Well, the bottom line is God tells us to love him and, love our neighbours as ourselves. And how do you treat your neighbour? And I think, what's going on over the next, couple of months in terms of what the FA are doing and pulling things together this informs people of, you know, different cultures, different understanding, but, you know, also about, you know, looking out for the person next to you. You know, how many times do supporters sit in a seat next to somebody because they got a season ticket and don't really know a lot about them? You know, how about finding out about that person and understanding that, you know, shouting out any racial terms or anything to discriminate isn't right and should be held accountable. So, you know, I think, again, it is about loving our neighbour, which is a basic line from you know, for Christianity.
Linvoy, thank you for the moment. I'm afraid to say we've had old blokes so far, haven't we? Becky Clark, thank goodness we're speaking to a woman now, England footballer, also plays, is it right, midfield for Bournemouth Sports FC? That's true, isn't it?
Well, I did play midfield, yeah. I've recently started playing in goal for this last season.
Right.
So, yeah, James and Peter were talking about grassroots football and church leagues and stuff. We're a bit of a football family. So my husband plays in the church league on a Saturday morning. The kids play. And then, yeah, 3 years ago, just after my twins were born, I started playing football as well. So I started playing for Bournemouth Sports. Just really low level, was not expected to be any good at all. But it's such a lovely community. And it works. We enjoy it.
I mean, I don't want to just concentrate on the obvious fact that you're a woman, but it is still very much a male-dominated sport, isn't it? And yeah, there are amazing players in women's football. Well, you being one of them. How do you find that really as a woman? Is there anything we can do? Does Christianity help in terms of promoting women's role in the beautiful game?
The Bible tells us that God made us all equal and has given us all good gifts to use. So we can use that as women playing football, or as kids playing football, men playing football. There's a place for everyone, and that's part of the community that football includes everyone. There are times when it is quite male dominated, but that's definitely beginning to change.
In the work that you do and in the games that you play, do you see it, or your faith, as something that you need to make overt? Do you see it as something that you need to witness about? Is that very much a part of how you see yourself in sport, in football in particular?
On the whole, I would say I try to live out my faith in the way that I act and present myself, and the kindness that I try to show to people. So actually, even being invited onto this, I was a teammate just called up. She works for the FA, said, would you be involved? And I didn't even know that she knew that I was a Christian. So really? Sometimes I don't try to be overt about it, but our matches are 2:00 on a Sunday afternoon, and often I come straight from church, having helped out with the kids' work there, or do something and then straight onto a match. So that's it. They're both part of my life equally.
Okay, Becky, thank you just for the moment. I want to turn also to Catherine Pepinster, who's a journalist specialising, has done for many, many years in religious affairs. She's the former editor of the Catholic periodical, The Tablet. And also, Catherine, you're mad about Brentford. Is that a fair summation of your entire life?
There's not much more to it.
Thought so.
I'm a devoted Brentford fan. I have been for many years, from when it was in League Two, and has climbed all the way up to the Premiership. It matters to me because it's very much my local team. I walk to the matches from where I live, and one of the things that's fantastic about it is very old school, in that it is a club that still appeals to the local community. You see people in their red and white striped shirts walking across all the parks locally to the matches, but it's not old school in that when you look at who those people are, it's a very diverse group of people, just as the local community is very diverse. It has space for us all on the stands, and I think that's a really important thing. The other thing is that people have been talking about the contribution that football clubs can make to their community, well, that's fantastic, and they can do that through community trust, etc. But if the local community is priced out, it doesn't quite feel like it's your club anymore. And Brentford, despite now being in the Premier League and having a new ground, is still relatively cheap. I've bought my season ticket for next season already, and it works out at around 25 quid a match. That's pretty cheap for Premier League games. Touch wood, we stay up. So all those things really matter. But being a fan, I think one thing that's really important about football is that you're not passive when you watch it. You're not a bystander. You are a participant when you're there. You're involved, and I think that's something where you can see a similarity with religious belief. You know, you are not a bystander when you have religious belief. You are a participant in something. You know, you have those beliefs, and something like Christianity calls upon you to act on those beliefs. And as a football fan, you know, I'm called upon to not just watch. I'm called upon to really get behind the team.
That's a really interesting view of it, and we heard from Peter as well about the foundations of many football clubs in Christianity, and I think hopefully things have moved on, but there is still, and I know you're something of an expert on this, there are still kind of historical examples of sectarianism which rears its head in particular cities, with particular teams. You know, there's the obvious ones, I guess, if we're talking about the Glasgow Rangers and Celtic kind of division. But do you think that's more or less gone away everywhere else, or do you think it's still there?
I think it's disappearing. I mean, Manchester is an example of a city that you'll know this, that was once seen as, you know, United's the Catholic club. City isn't. Interestingly, it's not down to United's roots, as Peter was talking about, with a club being founded by a clergyman, for example. Manchester United developed this Catholic connection through its actual fans. It was founded as Newton Heath, which was for railway workers, but because of migration, particularly in the north of England from Ireland, it had lots of fans who were Catholics. Then, of course, it was connected to Matt Busby, who was, you know, very devout Catholic. And then, rather cannily, one of its famous trainers, Louis Rocca, he was an Italian Catholic, and he worked out that he might use priests as scouts, so that he used his connections with Catholic priests to find talented young players, bring them up from the grassroots. So sometimes religion can be a good thing in a club.
Being a Mancunian, I well remember the Requiem Mass for Matt Busby and the procession through the streets and the absolute adoration for him still as a manager. Everybody knew he was a Christian. Yeah. Everybody knew, I guess, he was a Catholic, but it's just really interesting to reflect on that. But
of course, two really famous people associated with Manchester United were Protestants. George Best.
Exactly. And it was him that brought Best in from East Belfast to be one of the most successful players ever at Man United.
Absolutely, and Alex Ferguson as well. And of course, Alex Ferguson knew all about sectarianism. He came from Glasgow. He was a Protestant. He married a Catholic, and that did cause apparently problems for him within the family. But Alex Ferguson's an example of how you can transcend that kind of division in football.
Well, hopefully we have transcended the worst of that these days, and we're talking about the commonality of Christian values. Hannah Rich, you're a senior researcher at Theos, the think tank on faith and the England squad. Just tell us very briefly what Theos is.
Yeah, we're a think tank, as you say, which is a kind of a research organisation, and we work at the intersection of faith and society. So we write reports and articles and talk about everything that is kind of at that crossover of religion and society. And given that football is such an important part of so many of our lives, that it's natural that we kind of look at how it interacts with that as well.
And I know you've written a lot about the growing intersection of Christianity and football. And I think you said, didn't you, that the Euro squad in 2020 was probably the most Christian team ever fielded?
I think it's been claimed that, yeah, so not just in terms of practicing religion, but also in kind of historical. So there were players on the England team last year who are from kind of Irish backgrounds, so historically Catholic or historically Christian, but also through to other players who practice a faith themselves. So yeah, it's been claimed that last year's England squad was both culturally and kind of spiritually, I guess, the most Christian team we've ever fielded.
And now we see, I mean, famously the likes of Marcus Rashford, Raheem Sterling, talking very positively about their Christian faith. But not only talking about it, and clearly people like Marcus Rashford actually affecting society in terms of his work, his anti-poverty work.
Absolutely. And I think he's said very publicly that that's driven not only by his personal experiences of growing up in poverty, but also by his faith and the impact that had. And that's true for a number of players. I've spoken to kind of people who run food banks in local communities who say that kind of prominent players from their local clubs really unassumingly, without kind of any fanfare, have come and volunteered or have come and donated. And I think that's really important, that it's not just for the headlines. A lot of what Marcus Rashford has done, and necessarily so, has been in the headlines because it's been campaigning, it's been trying to change things at a policy level. But there are also players who are implementing their faith or putting it into practice at a local level just by kind of volunteering really quietly, but really brilliantly with their local faith communities. And
thank you so much. Alex, let me bring you in. You're chair of the English Football Association's Faith Network. And you've also worked on FA programs like Kick It Out, against racism, and you advise on religious festivals that encourages greater religious literacy in football. On that last point, and especially in relation to Kick It Out, is this still a big issue, do you think, in football?
Racism in football is still sadly an issue on the terraces. Some of it's gone away because there hasn't been anybody on the terraces for an 18-month period. People are now going back, but it does rear its ugly head again and again. Sometimes in England, there is still sectarian issues in places like Glasgow, for sure, and more so perhaps within different leagues within Europe as well. And the FA have been very strong on that. The Premier League have been extremely strong on that in the last 5 years, 3 or 4 years anyway. And I think the game is trying to kick it out, as you said, but also have systems and devices for reporting and in-stadium reporting and better training for stewarding and things like that. But I mean, there's a mixture of our work, why we do the festivals, and actually we do also schools work where we bring single faith schools to places like Wembley over a year period. So people from Sikh schools and Protestant schools, Jewish schools, Catholic schools can actually talk about football, play football, talk about their religious identity and their footballing identity. People as passionate as Catherine was in her 5-minute slot. I loved everything she said about the Bees and Brentford. And the fact that Brentford, if you like, Leo, are renaming everything. So it's not the football stadium, or it's not named after a big sponsor. I don't want, if people can get their stadium sponsored and that's part of the game, that's okay. But it's the Brentford Community Stadium. And that was a really big step by Brentford. And their model is being used again by other clubs through the leagues, not just elite football, saying, actually, what we want is something in the middle of our community, which represents our community. We want people in our stadiums to look like, pray like, not pray like people who are living around our stadiums. So what Catherine was saying about the Bees and people walking through the parks is really what good football looks like and good community development looks like. And I think that's reflected in a lot of what's been said today, whether it's James Kendall saying that very often football clubs are the heartbeats of the community. It's what Becky said about her whole family playing football. And Limvoy said, how do we treat our neighbours differently, and understanding different cultures and different religions? And I think that's what the RMC do well, the Religion Media Centre. I think it's what Arran and Dow, who's also on this call, do very well in trying to promote diversity. And Leo, it comes down to one thing. It comes down to what Hannah just said. If we want to win the World Cup, we need to get more young people playing football on the streets, then playing football on the pitch, then playing football up the levels. And if for a number of years that the number of actual teams, 11-a-side teams, went down and down and down, we want to build that up. And the only way of doing that is actually working with communities, because they're the great organizing power, whether they're Christian or they come from the minority faith communities, working with them and working to make the game very open to them and feeling friendly. So that's what we're doing in the FA Faith and Football. And that's why we're having sessions like today to explore what faith means, because I think faith alongside football makes a great community. That's my view.
I'm surprised, Alex, I haven't said this already, but the old saying, which we all know, is, religion is not about life and death. It's more important than that. And for me,
I think you've stolen that from someone from your town.
I've definitely stolen it. I didn't make that up. But it is kind of like a religion.
Great Matt Busby, yeah.
It is. Can I just say, because we have had questions in, and I'm so sorry, because getting through so many people, it's been really difficult. But one question quickly for you, Alex, because you are actually a rabbi. Whereas we talked before, didn't we, with Puya, about the Archbishop of Canterbury's team. Is there a rabbi's football team, we're being asked here?
It's not a chief rabbi's football team, but we have for someone, we suspended this during COVID. We have an agreement with St. George's Park, which is the national training centre owned by the FA, to have a rabbi's training day on the pitch. And if Puya, who actually lives down the road from me, wants to come up with the Archbishop 11s, we can do.
He's always up for a game.
We can do a joint training session, a bit of keepy uppy. We have played people like Johnny Hughes, who's a rabbi of the United Synagogue Rabbi of Radlett, who used to play for Reading and Swindon. So we need to get Johnny back into training, of course. But there is a link between the Jewish community and football, and there are books you can read about that, such as "Does Your Rabbi Know You're Here?" But that's for another day.
Okay, thank you, Alex. A question here also, and I don't know, I could perhaps put this to Linvoy. I'm not saying you're massively wealthy, Linvoy, but are players given any ethical and financial advice as a matter of course when they come into football? Is that something that happens? Could be linked to faith, could be not, just ethical advice.
Yeah, I think, clubs know they have a responsibility, especially with academy players, to help get them ready for life in football and life after football. To what level that goes through, I don't know, but the PFA will definitely have a handle on that. And I think after that, lots of players have started foundations and, do something for where they've come from. But the other side we've got to be careful of is that players are asked to do a lot of things, and whoever comes to them, they've got to be able to trust that what they're being asked to do is the right thing. So if it seems like a lot of players are not doing a lot for charity, they probably are, but it's all under the radar, so that it doesn't become about them. It becomes about the charity itself.
And Arran, there was a couple of points made in the chat going on from what Becky was saying about what is being done to support the women's game more, and I think you had just a couple of things to say about that, Arran.
Yeah, thanks, Leo. So just really to say that our previous strategy focused on doubling women's participation, which was done in the 3 years 2017 to 2020. I think really looking forward in the new women's strategy, the Inspiring Positive Change, is looking at ensuring that we continue that growth and ensuring that we make sure that there's fair representation for the women's game. There's some fantastic work being done up and down the country already. So the Wildcat Centres as a brief example that engages so many young women and girls from across various regions of all faiths, backgrounds, cultures, etc., and just making sure that whilst absolutely there's an acceptance around the women's game in terms of the past, we are doubling and redoubling our efforts to make sure investment into the women's game is clear.
Okay, thank you. And a quick comment also from Shabir Beg in the chat. A lot of good work and progressive work is being done in Glasgow, Scotland, alongside our organisation, the Scottish Alubate Society, engaging, with the FA, etc., promoting diversity, inclusion within the football fraternity. So thank you for those comments as well. We've come to the end of our time. I really, really appreciate the Football Association working with us on this. We've covered a lot of ground. Thank you for your attention, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. We had a lot of you, but hopefully we got across everybody and tackled some of the points about Christianity, values, and all of that being at the root of football, alongside, as you said, Arran, other faiths that you're working with as well. So thank you so much indeed, and thank you for your attention. And please join us again for future Zooms with the Religion Media Centre. Thank you very much.